but we are ready to get started. I am going to share my screen now. And we will get started. Hold on. Okay, can everybody see my screen?
No.
No. Okay, I know what the problem is. Share.
There you
Nope,
go.
that's not the right share. It's right here. Nope, that's not the right share either.
We can see it. It's
We
not
can
the right
see
one.
it.
Oh, but that's the stakeholder meeting. That's it.
Yep.
So you can see, can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay.
So if you go to slideshow now.
Yep. Beautiful. I can see everything now. Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us for the Charles River Basin RVMP or Riverbank Vegetation Management Plan stakeholder meeting. We thank you all for coming. The first thing we're going to do is run through some meeting logistics. And I do want to apologize. I want to thank everybody for being flexible about changing platforms. We had way more attendees, people who registered than we had anticipated. But again, this is not the perfect platform for this group, this number of people. So please be patient with me while we get through all this. Meeting logistics. We're going to take questions at the conclusion of the presentation. There's a lot to cover. And we ask that you raise your hand, which is in the participants' options, or submit via Q&A. I don't know if you have Q&A. If you do not have Q&A, please use the chat feature to submit questions. I will introduce you and unmute you when it's your turn to speak, once you put in your question. You will also have the opportunity to submit comments over the course of the next 4 weeks until Wednesday, the 13th of January, through our public comments forum and also via emailing me. Please note, in order to do this, we have to record this meeting, and the meeting will be a public record. So on behalf of Governor Baker, Lieutenant Governor Polito, EEA Secretary Theoharides, and DCR Commissioner Montgomery, we appreciate you all being here and thank you for your support. As a reminder, DCR's mission statement is to protect, promote, and enhance our common wealth of natural, cultural, and recreational resources for the well-being of all. And this project or this plan is really the accumulation or the crossing of all of these goals into one plan. The vegetation management on the banks and in the water really is about balancing all of these goals. And now I'm going to hand off to Project Manager Danielle Mellett to take it from here. Danielle?
Thanks, Jenny. So the purpose of this meeting is to present an overview of the Charles River Basin Vegetation Management Plan and provide an update on the implementation. We'll really briefly go over the terrestrial portion of the RVP and really focus on the aquatics portion. So like I said, we'll present an overview of the aquatic vegetation management plan. We'll discuss the aquatic vegetation management plan in the basin. And then we'd really like to gain input from you, the stakeholders, on how to implement and how we can work with you on the control of the invasives and create some partnership opportunities. Next slide. Next slide. Did we want double slide? So I am Danielle Mellett. I'm the landscape architect and project manager for DCR for the overall RVMP. Patrick Herron, who is executive director for Mystic River Watershed Association, will be giving you the overview of the vegetation management plan on the Mystic River. And then afterwards, Ann Carroll, who works for DCR, will be giving you, will be providing the discussion on the aquatic vegetation management plan. And we'll go through some discussion on various ways that we could possibly implement control of the invasives on the Charles River. So going through the DCR project team, we have a lot of people from DCR working on this project. Like I said, I'm Danielle Mellett. I'm project manager for this project. Jenny Norwood is Director of External Affairs. Jenna Johnson is Deputy Chief Director, Deputy Chief for Design and Project Management. Ruth Helfeld is Director of the Landscape Architecture Program. Eric Seaborn is Director of Natural Resources. Ali Ashandi is an inland ecologist. Ann Carroll is Director of Water Resources. Vanessa Curran, Water Resources Scientist. And Jim Riordan is the Project Manager for Wesson and Sampson, who is the consultant on this project. Next slide. So this is the RVMP project study area going from the Watertown Dam to the Science Museum Bridge. There's approximately eight test plots, and these locations going from Watertown, Cambridge, Boston, and we originally had one in Newton. That one has since been taken out. Next slide. So the goals of the RMVP was to restore a healthy riverbank ecology, which would provide for stable shorelines, provide vistas, really impact climate resiliency, and create a safe and stable tree canopy. We wanted to provide public access for opportunities for passive and active recreation along the riverbank, provide stewardship of the parkland that reflect the 100-year cultural values of the Charles River Reservation. And we want to engage a cooperative network of parkland stakeholders, yourselves and DCR, who both enjoy the many recreational opportunities, and to provide some volunteer assistance in managing the RVMP area with DCR. And also, we'd like to provide a framework to guide future capital restoration projects along the Charles River. Next slide. The RVMP report, really quickly, just to touch upon what's inside of it. It provides an overview of the project approach. It gives an existing conditions of the overall project, vegetation management strategy, gives management areas and approaches, possible management logistics, and references to other projects such as the Mystic River. Next slide. The RVMP test plots, like I said before, go from the Watertown Dam to the Science Museum. And there's a total of 8 test plots in Watertown, Cambridge, and Boston along the Charles River lower basin. Next slide. And this is just an example of one of the test plots looks like that Wesson Sampson has put together for us in our construction documents. Each test plot has a test plot location and also a control plot. The plots were chosen in varying conditions such as shade, sun, areas where there's a lot of topography or it's flat, areas where there's invasives, where we have some opportunities to do some invasive management. And also there's, we're trying to limit the amount of amendments we do to soil and just see how native vegetation will handle itself on its own in these locations. Next slide. And this is just an example of what you might find in some of the plant, the test plot. This is plant palettes, native vegetation that you should naturally occur seeing along the Charles River. Next slide. And now I'd like to introduce Patrick Herron, who's the Executive Director of the Mystic River Watershed Association, to give us an overview of their work on the Mystic River. Patrick?
Great. Well, thank you for the invitation to share a little bit about our experience and our partnership. I certainly hold many of the parties involved on the Charles River in very high regard, including the Charles River Watershed Association and the Charles River Conservancy. So if our experiences can be of value, great. I'll apologize in advance if my kids come in and visit with us. I was correctly introduced as the executive director, but I have been chained to these desks at the Mystic River Watershed Association for nearly 11 years. And for much of that time, I managed this program at MIRA. And so I do have some familiarity and experience here to share. I'll just give you a brief history. The Mystic River was formerly a tidal system until dams went in, and the river really became freshwater fully starting in around 1965 when the Amelia Earhart Dam came in and was a much more effective dam than previous dams. And so really this is a saltwater estuarine system that became a freshwater system only in the last 50 years. I got involved in our organization, started tackling water chestnut in 2009 with our first harvesting in 2010 and 2011. And we formed a partnership with the Department of Conservation and Recreation, City of Medford, and 2 boat clubs beginning in 2012. At that time, water chestnut was impeding navigation in the river and really deteriorating the aesthetics of the river and really impacting recreation. So at that time, we began to apply a few management approaches at trying to remove water chestnut. We hired a firm to do mechanical harvesting, and we did hand pulling. At that time, and in the next few years, we really had a peak amount of water chestnut that covered nearly 70 acres of dense patches of this vegetation. So the biomass was really incredible. We really kept at it pretty intensively for 4 or 5 years, with mechanical harvesting being a really significant investment. Mystic River Watershed, the City of Medford, and the boat clubs contributed partnership dollars to DCR. And at the same time, our legislators, along with legislators in the Charles, were setting aside funds to address invasives as well. So this was a very intensive and expensive effort. And we, on our turn, mobilized about 1,000 people a year to get out in canoes for part of that effort. We divided the river into 2 sections. Our hand pulling really started tackling the upper section, and the mechanical was dedicated down below. Being a relatively cheap Yankee, the reason that we did that is that we would have had to double our mobilization costs to have the harvester taken out and put in back upriver. So we decided not to do that. We felt pretty good about these efforts for about 2015 or so, and 2016, when we saw pretty sharp reductions in water chestnut after we'd been going at it for a number of years. And then a dose of humility popped in the next year when we started to see the emergence of milfoil. Eurasian milfoil is a submerged aquatic invasive that is quite difficult. The first year we were harvesting it along with the water chestnut, and we certainly provided relief, but of course it just grew back. Applying the same tools to this problem, the mechanical harvester, was like mowing the grass. We, in concert with the DCR and the boat clubs, began evaluation of other options. We looked at whether we could let in saltwater into the river for periodic flushing to see if that would help. We learned from DCR that that was not an option currently, the way the dam is set up and their management capacity. And our next option was looking at herbicides. And ultimately we pursued and have been applying herbicides in the most lower portion of this river in the basin. In fact, it's in that image you see here, you see a corner of that basin. And we've been applying those herbicides for, I think, about 5 years. We have applied 2 types of herbicides, both contact herbicides that knock out the plant really quickly. And then a systemic herbicide that is a slower release that gets pulled into the root system and ultimately does more over the long term to undermine growth of that plant using a different biological mechanism. I think I'll stop here to just share that, well, I'll say a couple, I'll say that we are, we feel like this partnership has been successful in addressing what was a critical issue for our waterways, that it really was to the point where people couldn't use these resources. I'd love to pivot to just a few lessons learned that I'll share with you and some of our observations. I think my first observation to share, and this is a fairly obvious one, but the Mystic River, like the Charles River, is a natural system, but it is also an engineered system. In fact, the engineered system seems to overtake the natural system in terms of the forces. And we have built cities all along this river. And so I think when I started this work, I really had this idea of restoration and a self-sustaining system. And I think with a greater appreciation of the impacts that we have through our stormwater systems and the impoundment that we create in the dams, it's a reminder that this is not anymore a system that has natural processes dominating, that there are too many other stressors in the system to have the expectation that the river will be managing itself and be a totally healthy system. That's not a realistic expectation for the Mystic River as it currently is. Certainly, we're all hopeful that MS4 permits and TMDLs will all improve the situation, but that's one thing. The second thing I wanted to offer is that the tools to apply on these challenges are of a limited suite. And we ultimately, while we came to herbicides with a lot of hesitation, given our care for this natural system, ultimately we felt that it was the right thing for this river system to make sure that it was accessible to people and that they could use it in this urban system. And while it's a chemical, and herbicides in general are associated with lots of poor outcomes in other places and in other herbicides, for this set of herbicides, we felt like this was the correct management approach. The other thing about that is that we had an opportunity at that time to really say, well, we don't want, we're just not comfortable with this. And we really felt like that would have been shirking our duties as the Watershed Association to just say, we're going to let somebody else handle this. We got involved in the beginning because of some concerns that each of the stakeholders and the butters on the river were going forward to conservation commissions with their own solutions. And there was a real patchwork approach and consideration of how to handle this challenge that's shared by so many parties. I would share the experience we've had with conservation commissions, that some of our conservation commissions have been sympathetic and grateful for recognizing the challenge and appreciative of the efforts that are ongoing. One of our conservation commissions has really felt that really frustrated that we are back each year, and we have been in the last 4 or 5 years, applying herbicides. And I think that's a reasonable frustration to have. One of my goals is to really try to communicate about these challenges of this system being an engineered system and this limited suite of tools that I think are available to the challenges we have in the Mystic at the moment. And I think that if we were to go back and do it again, my approach would have been to invite the Conservation Commission earlier in the process as a partner in reviewing that toolkit and helping us select those tools to solve that problem. If they had more of a voice early on, I think they would be more comfortable with the solutions. And they bring a set of experiences that and expertise that would have made that conversation richer for everybody. So that is something I wish, and still is something that we seek to do. Finally, I would add one more thing, and it's about partnership. Partnership is not just a word. Partnership really does take a lot of commitment of time and listening, sharing and transparency, and making yourself available. And I think that there are times where partnerships can be frustrating, where you are trying to get your point across and you're trying to seek an outcome, and you wonder if your partners are there with the same commitment. And our partnership with DCR has yielded, I think, very positive outcomes. And what I would say about it is for a successful partnership to emerge, it really requires a lot of time and listening and meeting and talking for that partnership to really bring about fruition. So that's my guidance, feedback for everybody about why I think the Mystic has been successful, is I think we put in that time, and I think we've been doing it for quite a while. I know that DCR and Charles River Watershed Association and other parties have been tackling similar issues, including water chestnut, for many years, and have similar lessons and insights and additional expertise that will guide this to a good outcome. But thank you for letting me share our experiences.
Thank you so much, Patrick. My name is Ann Carroll, and I'm going to jump in now. Next slide, please, Jenny. And Patrick, we very much appreciate your partnership. And as I think everyone hopefully on the Zoom can see, there are a lot of similarities with these two systems. And I'm also very grateful that I feel that we have two excellent partners in Myra and CRWA, who has done, we've been working with them to do very similar work through the partnership with a water chestnut. Again, that's been more focused on the Lakes District. But in what we were hoping to do was, learn and hopefully benefit, because the Mystic is, I'd say, a little bit ahead of the Charles in regards to the approach that they've taken with the milfoil. This has emerged similarly in the Charles, and that's partly why we're here. And so I think we can really benefit from the lessons learned there. And so this table is just, again, summarizing, what we've done, the work we've done in the Mystic. Again, and Patrick spoke nicely about it. We have an additional project that's been looking at the Phragmites, and that's been ongoing. And I just put some rough budget numbers in here for folks to just so you could get a sense of kind of the ballpark of these. And then again, as Patrick said, the milfoil is the most recent that we have taken on. And we do have seen that we have been able to knock back the milfoil. And that is ultimately our hope with all of these, that, we may still have to do regular maintenance, but that we can kind of knock them back and get them under control so that we're using, less herbicides or, less mechanical harvesting as time goes on. Next slide, please. So just transitioning now into the Charles, and so where we are there. So what have we done, and what do we have? So we do have a draft plan, and there was a plant survey done for the lower basin. So just quickly here, first summarizing, as I had said, many years of successful water chestnut harvesting in the Lakes District with the CRWA as our partner, and they've done very similarly to the Mystic, tremendous volunteer coordination and work there, along with the harvesters, and that's been, successful in knocking back. Additionally, there have been some herbicide treatments in specific coves. Wares Cove has had a Partnership Grant and Purgatory Cove in the past as well. So this past summer, there was a complete plant survey done for the lower basin, and I'll show you just a couple quick results, and then we'll move into, there were some draft management recommendations that went along with that based on the plants that they found. So they did, let's see. And so just quickly, and then I can go into a little bit more detail, but in summary, one of the points they made, which is well taken, is that if we don't include the Lakes District in this, then we're likely to get reinfestation. So we should really look at it holistically. And we certainly agree with that. And so we are proposing that we would conduct a very similar plant survey kind of upstream in the Lakes District as soon as we're able this season, so that we would have that full set of data there to inform our management. So starting with an early season and then a late season survey. And then again, and the other piece of it is that the report recommends an integrated management approach, but unfortunately, when your tools are limited, sometimes it doesn't look so diverse in terms of what it's presenting. Next slide. So, and I apologize if you can't see this that well, but so this is a, this map represents the overall biomass. So it's including all of the species and, bio volume. So that's basically looking in the water column. So anything that's red or orange would mean that in August of this past year that the plants were sort of all the way up to the surface. So topped out, filling the entire water column. So I was a little bit heartened by this because I think it shows, I mean, it certainly shows in the sort of area closer to the Watertown Dam and the narrower stretches, there is greater density. But as you get further, closer to the impounded areas further downstream, there's still a lot of open water there where you have depths greater than, say, 6 feet. Next slide. So the report includes, I'm going to say there's probably like 50 individual maps. So for each of the species, they found 18 different species, and 6 of them were invasive. Those are shown here in red, with the predominant invasives being milfoil and the 2 species of milfoil, and also the fanwort and the curly-leaf pondweed. But again, so very detailed mapping of all of these species, and I guess that was all I wanted to say there, I think. Next slide, please. So then just quickly getting into, the recommended options that were provided, again, by species. There are some choices here. As Patrick had mentioned, there's, a systemic herbicide versus a contact herbicide, the diquat being the contact herbicide. And that's one of the options. And then in some cases, possibly mechanical harvesting, for the pondweed, because it doesn't spread by fragmentation. It's potentially an option. Most of the pondweeds are native, curly leaf pondweed being the exception, being an invasive. We do have some concerns about contamination in the sediment, though. If we're talking about any mechanical harvesting, that would be something else that we would want to take a look at. Next slide. And then I think this is so some of the additional invasives, and again, really pretty much looking at the option being herbicides. Next slide, please. So I think at this point, we wanted to stop and really, again, trying to learn from our experience in the Mystic. We don't want to move forward without consensus if we can get it. We'd like to have all the voices heard. But before we go to the conservation commissions with a plan, we'd like to hear folks thinking and kind of have that pulled together. So I think at this point, we were hoping to open it up to, maybe first, get folks' thoughts and reactions to the data that we presented and the management techniques, and then maybe spend some time on that, answer the questions as best we can. And then secondly, talking about, next steps in terms of implementation and partnership opportunities. So I think maybe I'll turn it back to Jenny. Do you want to open it up?
So,
Should I quickly do, I'm sorry, should I quickly do the next slide, or we were stopping here for a discussion?
let me see what the next slide is. Let's stop here for discussion.
Okay.
And then we're done. So if anybody has questions, is there, I have to apologize, I'm not as familiar with Zoom meetings. If there's not a hand raising function, if you could chat, please, and just let me know that you want to speak and I will unmute you. Yeah.
Jenny, do you want to stop sharing so that we can all see each other?
Sure. That's a good idea too. There we go. So does anybody have any questions or comments now?
I see a hand raised,
Oh, is that Ralph?
but you're muted.
Ralph, if you could unmute.
There
There you go.
Going back to the mid-90s, Watertown Yacht Club on their own hired a mechanical harvester for the water chestnuts. We did that for 2 or 3 years, and in the 3rd year, there was some money left over from what was going on in Weir's Cove, and they came down. We had been doing spring cleaning, and they came down and did another raking in the fall. And since then, we have been very, very lucky with the water chestnuts. However, we do have 2 problems, both of which significantly contribute to the silting up of the river. And that is the milfoil and something that you didn't discuss at all, which are the water lilies. The rooting system for both of those plants significantly capture the mud or sand or whatever is drifting down the river, and has made a major contribution to halfway between the Watertown Yacht Club and the Newton Yacht Club, where we used to have 8 or more feet of water. You can now essentially walk across the river if you can stand the muck that you're walking in. There is anywhere from a foot to 3 feet of water crossing the river at that point. And Crab and MIT have done a major analysis of the river depths all the way up and down the river, and especially of interest to us is how shallow the water upriver from where the narrows after the Watertown Dam dump their silt into the river. The current slows down dramatically. Whatever is in the water falls to the bottom. The roots of the milfoil and now the water lilies catch it, and the river is becoming almost unnavigable up in that area. So anything that you can do to help get rid of the invasive species and the natural species of water lily would significantly aid to the increasing flow of water and therefore the depth of the river. That's all I have to say at the moment. Thank you very much for listening.
Jenny, you're muted.
Of course I'm muted. I have a question now from Damon Carter. Eurasian milfoil is found quite far up the Charles. Would we attack it upstream or down?
We're proposing that it makes the most sense to start upstream. Are you saying, just to clarify, even above the Lakes District?
Damon,
I
I'm
see
going to
some
ask you to unmute.
head.
Damon,
Yes,
go
that's
ahead.
nodding.
it's way above the Lakes District. It's above Dover. It's all the way up to Medfield. You can find milfoil almost everywhere in the Charles. We have water chestnuts up here in Dedham where I am. So those can float downstream as well. They're getting under control here, but they've been a problem. So many of these, and we're getting fanwort up here also. So many of these plants that you're mentioning as problems in the basin are also problems further upstream.
Okay, anybody, any other questions or comments?
Like Lucas Rogers raised his hand.
Oh, thank you. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Oh, terrific. My question is about efforts I know another organization is making to use native vegetation, and in particular, I think floating native vegetation to encourage protozoa populations, which it is hoped would encourage some of the toxic algae, blue-green algae that have become increasingly an issue of safety for boaters. So I'm wondering, has any thought, first of all, are you going to be talking about that effort here? And also, I'm curious to know whether any thought has been given to the effect that the herbicides would have on that native vegetation or that that protozoa population.
Thank you. Anybody else from DCR, please feel free to chime in, but we are aware of that project. We weren't planning to talk about it today. I think it's great that they're piloting that. We don't think, but we could certainly, if, as we got closer to, making any decisions about any management tools, because those are so far down, the floating wetland, at least the one that I'm aware of, is so far downstream. We don't anticipate, and the concentration, if anything were used, it would be much further upstream, and it would be such a low concentration that we think we're not concerned that there could ever possibly be any impact to that wetland. But we could, we would look at that, a lot more carefully as we got to the point of actually permitting anything. But I think that it being, the lower basin, there just would be so much dilution by the time you got down there. I just can't imagine they're putting, if it were sonar, they're putting it in at, I think, at like 20 parts per billion, that there would be any impact. But it is on our radar, I guess, to answer your question. And we certainly would want to ensure that we didn't do any damage to that floating wetland.
So I'm going to jump in here. Laura Jasinski from the Charles River Conservancy. I'm going to unmute her and she can tell you more about the floating wetland that was just launched this summer to actually test some of those theories about protozoa being able to control. I think it's the blooms, correct, Laura?
Right. So thanks for the presentation, and apologies for not being on video today. But our floating wetland project is a research project and is looking at the ecological effects that the wetland can have, specifically creating habitat for zooplankton, with the hope that we'll see data that they could help, kind of gobble up and eat the algae with more like installations. I am not the researcher on the team, so I can't get into too much detail on the specifics. But the 700 square foot wetland that we have, we certainly don't expect that to make a meaningful difference in the blooms in the Charles right now. But we hope that we can get data that could help us figure out how to right size wetlands for algal blooms among, other nutrient absorption and those types of things. But I'm not concerned about the what we've talked about today in terms of affecting the wetland negatively. And I'll put in the chat for those that might be interested in learning a little bit more, where you can find it on our website.
Thank you, Laura. Oh, Kane, I'm going to unmute you. Okay. Yeah, there you go.
Thank you. Just, you had the slide up about the bio volume in August. And while there was a bunch of water open for us, I'm from community rowing, right? And for us recreational users of the river, it really did constrict the travel lane on the river. So as it sort of came in from the edges, that center lane of navigable water was really constricted, and we saw sort of increased concern about safety. So, as we address this, if we can sort of keep not just one path through the river open, but a little bit more safety zone, that would really be appreciated.
Thank you. I have another question here from Alex Zosels. I hope I pronounced that correctly. I'm not familiar with the herbicides proposed. Are there known environmental impacts?
So if it's applied according to the label, the EPA label, there should not be any. They are very specific, and depending on which one, if we chose the sonar, which is the systemic one, it's actually quite specific to the invasives. And what we've seen, we've applied it at a few other DCR ponds, is that the native plants actually usually are okay or can come back. So, and that would be the biggest concern, would be you wouldn't want to wipe out the native plants. We so far have not seen any data on our other projects or anything else that we're aware of where that has happened.
Okay, another written in question from Lisa Kumpf. Are there thoughts on how long this treatment would take and how it would be phased?
I feel like the answer really depends on the management goals, which is why we're hoping to hear from you today. And, if you're trying to just clear one area, then, short term, for example, in the Mystic, and Patrick, if you're still on, please feel free to jump in. But I think, where we had issues with access right around the boat ramps, you could use the dicot, which essentially just, it's contact. So it's just pellets. So basically whatever it touches is impacted, and then it doesn't really move. Whereas the sonar needs to have kind of a concentration time and be in the water column for a longer amount of time. So that is a matter of like 30 to 60 days you're supposed to maintain those concentrations, and they usually come back in and do a booster. We would certainly want to get the consultants who know a lot more about this than we do to, depending on what folks felt comfortable with. If it's, just trying to keep certain areas clear, there's options. So the answer is a little bit that it depends. Does that help? Or if do you have any follow-up questions?
Lisa, there you go.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Thank you. And it's good to get like a sense of, the different options that you guys are considering. I guess I'm thinking also over multiple years, like how long would how many years over which would the treatment have to be applied for it to be effective in a longer?
Well, so I think, and again, Patrick, please jump in, but on the Mystic, I thought we're in either year 4 or 5. But we initially started with the dicot and then added the sonar, which is more of like you can target a much larger area with the sonar. Is that correct, Patrick? I think it's been maybe 4 years, maybe 5.
Yeah, I think for the application of the sonar, which is a systemic, you are shooting for an outcome where you have impacted the root systems of these plants so that we would have a resulting benefit that would last past the application period, so that if you applied, for example, if you applied this herbicide and it was successful, you would probably be applying it for a few years in a row with the hope that you would be able to skip a year or two. The idea that we are extirpating or completely addressing these invasive plants means that we're really underestimating the adaptation and successful traits that these invasive plants have. These are really successful plants and will continue to grow in the Charles and the Mystic into the future. There's no eliminating them that unless another biological solution emerges in the next period of time. But I don't think any of these solutions give you the end, if you will.
Okay, I've got another question here from Heather Miller. Sorry if I missed this during the presentation, but to Patrick's point about bringing in the Concoms early in the process, has that been done with the Charles?
I don't know. Is there anybody here? I know some of the agents, or hopefully all, were invited, and I don't know if anyone is here, but we would like to bring them in. And the reason we haven't is because we wanted to hear from you about these management options before we kind of put forward. I think the next steps would be to hire someone to develop, say, maybe like a 5-year plan and get the permits. And I do think it would be good if we could learn from our experiences in the Mystic, and ideally have a conversation with the conservation commissions before we file with them to get their feedback.
So ironically, or it's not ironic, Jem Letourneau from Cambridge was here and literally just signed off right before that question got asked. So, next question, go on.
I was just going to say, I mean, again, depending on how we wanted to tackle this, we could have probably up to 5 different conservation commissions, I'm thinking, right. or even more.
Carl, I saw you waving, but I've got one more question to read. Are you considering a monitoring program, and what type of monitoring would that be?
So for the aquatic invasive species, the standard protocol is to do an early season and a late season plant survey every year. So the early season survey is basically to say what's out there, and you use that to inform your management for the season. And then the late season is essentially to say, how did we do? How successful were we in clearing things away? So we would certainly propose to do that at a minimum. And beyond, and I don't know if you're thinking anything beyond that, but that's pretty much typical for what we normally do.
Okay, Carl, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. I'm with the Charles River Alliance of Voters, and I want to know whether you considered some other alternatives. Benthic barriers have been used pretty successfully in localized projects. And at least in 5 states, they've also been using what's called a milfoil weevil to attack the milfoil very successfully.
Yeah, so I can address both of those. So the benthic barriers, the benthic mats, we're certainly not opposed to that. That it's just an issue of scale. We've used them before ourselves, basically around our swim beaches. Sometimes around the ropes of a swim beach, we might put down benthic matting with the idea being, you're smothering everything under there. And so it's a physical means of preventing the plants from coming up. Just the scale and we have a flowing water system here, so that makes it more difficult. A lot of times we have scuba divers install them. You have to kind of put cement blocks on them. So I think it would be very challenging to do that in kind of a fluvial system. But if people had we highly recommend them if you have a kind of a small infestation or a pioneer infestation. We've used that technique and we think it's a very good technique to consider. So if maybe around a boat ramp in the river, it's possible. But for the kind of large scale infestations that we see on the Charles, don't see that as feasible or realistic. And then for the weevils, we've done some of our own experiments. We've sort of been tracking them over the years. We haven't really heard anything promising. I'd be interested if you had something to share, like a recent study that was promising.
Yeah, I've got 5 studies actually in 5 different states.
Yeah, we did some of our own in Massachusetts, releasing the weevils. We funded those through our Lakes and Ponds grant program in the past, and really didn't. Again, it could be a scale issue. The numbers that you'd have to put out there, and there was a lot of predation on them. They're very tasty, and so everything likes to eat them before they eat the plants. So we did kind of basically give up on that a number of years ago, but we could certainly, again, mostly probably because of the scale. And then some of the other biological controls that are available in other states are not available here. I'm thinking specifically of sterile grass carp. Sometimes people bring that up as, an herbivore, a fish herbivore that can it's like an underwater goat that can eat them.
Right.
Those are illegal in Massachusetts. So that's another tool that we don't have.
I mean, I want to be careful in introducing other biological species into an ecosystem, but
yeah,
the weevil seems to be one that even after you wipe out the milfoil, it seems to scale back because it's got nothing to feed on. So it's a little self-limiting.
Could you forward links to the studies?
You sure will.
To my email address? That would be great.
Yeah.
And we could, always willing to entertain, pilots too.
Right.
Trying different techniques. If we can figure out how to make it work, maybe there's a cove or, so we can certainly look back into that. And I appreciate if you sharing those with us.
And I think we're in a situation where we have a waterway that's getting choked off by milfoil.
Yeah.
It is becoming a hazard to recreational use. For rowers, once they get into an area with milfoil, if they catch an oar on the milfoil, they can roll over. So it's a more immediate concern for us. I'm a little concerned if we wait another year to do anything, that we just have a bigger infestation and we just haven't made any progress in reducing it.
And in terms of the timeline, in order to be out there on the river working, we will need to be getting those permits in a very short fashion.
Right.
Yeah, we'd like to see some action on this. I think, people have been looking at this problem for a long time. And I know you've done some feasibility studies, but this problem's growing at an exponential rate, and we need to tackle it.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other user groups besides rowers that have concerns or other impacts? Anybody on this call that we haven't talked about yet?
Power boaters are certainly affected by it.
Yeah, Ralph, the first speaker, Ann,
okay.
That's the boat, the Watertown Yacht Club. So
Okay.
they're power boaters, right?
Okay.
Yes, he's waving.
We as an organization represent rowers, sailors, paddlers, and power boaters.
Right.
So we represent every boathouse on the Charles.
Okay, I've got another comment. Could an education campaign accompany the treatment to teach people about why invasives exist in the Charles, excess nutrients, and how to address the root cause? Yes.
Yes. I'll just make one clarifying point about the excess nutrients. I think, yes, we should, and it's a good idea. And we certainly have a lot of materials around the invasives and transport and so on and so forth. With the excess nutrients, the impact that you see in the river, let me put it this way. If we got rid of all of them, we would still have these rooted plants problem because they're mostly getting their nutrients from the sediments. However, I think it's still a tremendous benefit to keep chipping away at all the excess nutrients because of the algae blooms, the cyanobacteria. That's where you could see a marked improvement over time, we hope, you know, as we chip away, and all of you I know are chipping away at trying to reduce the nutrient inputs. But we certainly, that gets back to, I think, what Patrick was saying, it's an urban system, highly impacted. All the watershed management in the world is not going to get rid of these plants. There's sunlight, there's sediment there for them to grow in, and they're just perfectly happy.
Actually, that leads to the next question. Has there been any consideration of keeping the water level in the lower basin higher to reduce sun penetration to the river bottom?
It's a thought. I was going to say the opposite, which is that in some of our lake and pond systems, people do drawdowns to try to control these plants. I don't think that's an option here. I think we'd need Bill Goda on to answer that, because or Jenny, I don't know what you think, or actually Rob.
Yeah, Rob's here. Let me
say anything
go ahead,
about
Rob.
that? You know, we're very constrained in terms of the water levels.
Yes, good afternoon. Just to comment for the Charles River level, we have a 2-foot operating range that we're required to maintain that level within. And typically it's on the low end of that range anyway. So it wouldn't have any major effect in terms of lowering it to the bottom of that range. Gets kept quite at the bottom of the range typically.
Now, Rob, I think this next question actually will go to you too. Would dredging help?
Dredging is part of a management plan, perhaps, for the waterway. DCR has been involved in limited dredging, particularly at the Faneuil Hall Brook outfall 2015, but we have not undertaken or studied possible dredging options to control general sediment accumulation in the river. There have been other mechanisms of oxidation and so forth for other concerns, but not at the present time. It will be interesting to entertain.
Could I chime in again?
Sure.
The Charles River watershed the Charles River Alliance of Boaters has done a depth chart that I'm sure many of you are aware of. We've also done an analysis of how the river bottom has changed over the last 120 years. And the river is getting shallower. We are losing parts of the river that are usable for boating because we have not been dredging. The state and the federal government used to dredge between 1900 and 1950, about every 10 years, in the region above the North Beacon Street Bridge. And that stopped around 1950, and it's been filling in ever since. That's an area that's gotten significantly shallower. In areas it's less than a foot deep. We've lost a lot of usable water in that area. And that has also at the same time led to very fertile ground for milfoil and water lilies. And the two are linked in some way, but we're actually in a period where we're losing soil or losing water. I'm sorry. We have another area around Magazine Beach where we've lost 4 to 6 feet in the last 100 years. Across the width of the river, the entire width of the river, we lost 4 to 6 feet of water depth. So sedimentation is a big problem now. And it's something that we're going to have to deal with.
Yep.